of public speaking can be really overwhelming. And we can sometimes think that all the eyes are judging us and just waiting for us to make a mistake. The problem with this is it really holds us back from opportunities. It can silence us when we should be speaking up, and it can keep us really stuck in self-doubt. Maybe you felt like that yourself. But here's the truth. Fear is not the enemy. In fact, it's just an obstacle standing between us and confidence. And the right strategies can actually turn that fear that we're having into power. So my name is Danielle Drew, and I used to be a terrible, terrified public speaker. And today I'm going to share with you the steps that I took to help me to become a confident public speaker and to finally feel in control. So let's get started. I have found that conquering public speaking fear started when I really understood the source of my fear, what it was that was really at the heart of making me feel so anxious and afraid. And when I recognized that public speaking is a learned behavior, just changed everything for me. You know, we're often taught to be afraid to speak from a young age. I don't mean consciously, I mean environmentally. Think about it. Babies have no fear about speaking, right? They use their voices to express everything, to get attention. And when we have toddlers, we get really excited when our toddlers say their first words. In fact, they're encouraged to talk and form words. Now, the problem starts when we get to school, because school, in my experience, has been where anxiety really starts to blossom, because kids in school are taught to sit up and be quiet. And for many people, that's where their fear of public speaking begins, when they're called out for talking in front of other people and in some way punished for doing so. It's what I call a fear seed being planted, and that can often grow and blossom throughout the rest of people's school career. And I'm going to cover more of this in later lessons. But for now, think about this. If we learnt to be anxious about speaking in public, then we can unlearn that behavior. Interesting concept, right? In fact, we can replace our anxiety and fear behaviors with better ones that serve us instead of just holding us back. And the unlearning concept is really popular in education circles. So to help us to unlearn and to let go of that fear, I created my P3 confidence system, which I teach as part of Vocal Power, Public Speaking Made Easy. And it helps to combat those key fear symptoms that many people have when they even think about trying to talk in front of a group of people. And this system shows you how to relearn and how to grow step by step by step so that you can become a confident public speaker. Now let's see how this system works for the fear element of public speaking. We take the first element, which is prepare. If you understand what your fear is based on, then you can plan a strategy to combat it. Then the practice element comes into play when you refine that strategy through specific practice techniques. And then the present element of the system is where you apply that strategy and then you review and reset so that you can improve each time you talk. Let me give you an example. Before we can beat our fear of public speaking, we have to work out what the actual symptoms are based on. What is it that's causing us to experience that stress? And I like to think of it like when you go to the doctors. When you go to the doctor's going to ask you a whole lot of questions. What are your symptoms? How are you feeling? Tell me what that looks like. Describe how it makes you feel. We use the same process as part of the preparation strategy in understanding our fear. And what I've found has worked well for me and for all my students across the last decade is to find the real cause of fear. And then when you know what's causing your fear, apply a solution to that fear and use a system to do so. Now, I'm big on systems, and in the words of famous author James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, a system is important if you want to win repeatedly, not just once, but repeatedly. Most of us are not going to be asked to speak in public just one time in our lives, so I love to teach people how to win repeatedly as a confident public speaker. So let's unmask that fear and really understand it. There are 7 different public speaking fears, 7, and we're going to uncover each one of them and its source and then get tools to manage it. So today is all about fear of the audience. Think about this. If you took out the audience completely, public speaking is pretty easy, right? In fact, it's just an email you're reading out. It's when you add the audience in that trouble can stir up and things get tricky, whether you're talking to a small team or a large group or a stadium full of people. The reason that the audience fear can really play on us is because we have this belief, this thought in the back of our minds that our audience wants us to fail. And in fact, not only do they want us to fail, they are prepared to mock us mercilessly as soon as we do. Now, to understand this fear, we need to unmask its source. One of the things that contributes to fear of audience is this fear we have about being judged. And many speakers are worrying about being criticized or looking foolish or maybe even being seen as incompetent. And our brain is perceiving our audience as a group of people who are judging us, evaluating every word we say and every action that we take. Another reason that we can fear our audience is because we have this innate fear of rejection. And fear of rejection is a social survival instinct because humans are hardwired to seek out social acceptance. Historically, if you're excluded from a group, this can mean danger. You won't have a habitat that you can be protected in when you're vulnerable and asleep. You won't have access to food that the group hunts for you. And the subconscious fear here is if I mess this up, the group are not going to like me and I'll be rejected. So it's tapping into that social survival instinct that we all have. And this is when our flight or fight response can really kick in. When our brains perceive a threat, like standing alone in front of a crowd of people, it can trigger the release of all of these hormones, particularly cortisol and adrenaline. And that can lead to some things you might be familiar with: shaking, sweating, rapid heartbeat, and even mind blanks, going blank in the brain. Maybe you've experienced some of those things before. We can also worry about fear of uncertainty, some kind of loss of control. We don't know how that audience is going to react to our talk. We don't know if our technology is going to fail. Maybe our slideshow won't work. Maybe my microphone won't work. Or maybe they'll ask a question that we do not know the answer to, and we're going to feel really caught off guard. All of these things can also lead to anxiety. Another element in the fear of audience is an over-awareness of the audience, being focused so much on the audience's facial expressions or their reactions. Are they sitting there looking at their phone because they're bored? We're so focused on what the audience is doing, we feel really scrutinized, even if the audience isn't judging us at all. So those are the elements that can lead to fear of the audience. Maybe some of those are things you found yourself. Now, if you want to get this handy download and the rest of the program, it's in the classroom in my Vocal Power Public Speaking Made Easy school community. You just go to the classroom and click on the module and it will be there for you. Here's a QR code to get access to the program for free for 7 days if you're not already involved in the community. Now that we understand why we fear our audience, it's time for the solution. And this one was a hard truth for me personally to hear. The truth is, your audience is only concerned about themselves. It's not about us at all. In fact, if you've ever been in an audience where the speaker is clearly visible in terms of their nerves, then you know that a nervous speaker makes the audience nervous too. So if they're at our talk, our audience actually just wants to know with them, what's in it for me? They want to know what they can get out of the talk. They do not want us to fail purely because they don't want to feel uncomfortable watching you being nervous and failing. It makes us cringe when other people are publicly failing in a public speaking situation. So it's really important to understand it's not about us at all. It's about the content that you're delivering. Your audience want to know why they should listen to you. What does it mean for them? Is it going to be good for them? Is it going to be bad for them? And all their focus is really not on us at all. It's on what you're saying and how does that mean? What does that mean to me personally as the audience member? It's not about how we're delivering it. It's about the words we're saying. So instead of focusing on what are they thinking about me? Are they judging me? Will something go wrong? Me. Turn it around and ask yourself, how can I help this audience? How can I serve them? When you change that focus, wonderful things happen. Start thinking about before you're doing your speech or before you're going on stage or before you're standing up in front of that meeting, don't ask yourself questions. And if you're not thinking you're asking yourself these questions, your mind is processing them without you being aware of it. So instead, start thinking about this question above and beyond everything else. Put your focus on this question. What's the one key takeaway I want my audience to have at the end of my talk? Or how can I make this talk useful to my audience? Some version of how can I help them? Now, the reason that we do this, very interesting. It works because it shifts our focus from self-consciousness to serving our audience. And this actually actively reduces our fear. It's weird, right? Let me tell you why. Remember I said to you earlier that we can get the shakes and the sweats when we get all anxious and afraid. These stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline pump through our body, and that creates that kind of stress response. Now, this is a scientific response that has been documented that happens to people when they get really stressed. And the reason that this happens is because there are two main parts to our brain. Now, I'm no scientist. There are lots of different parts to the brain, but the two that we're looking at here that years of research have been focused on is the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. If we ask these types of deliberate questions, we're engaging this part here, the blue part, the prefrontal cortex. Now, that part of the brain handles our logical thinking or the rational thoughts that we have. This part of the brain here, the limbic system, that's the response, the emotional reaction. That's where our flight and fight response live. But the interesting thing is, if we ask questions to engage our logical prefrontal cortex, it suppresses and turns off our limbic system, which is where our fear is processed. So we can actually reduce and even turn off our fear if we start thinking about how can I serve my audience? We can override that fear-driven flight or fight response. The other beautiful thing about helping others is when we help others, instead of the cortisol and the adrenaline pumping through our system, we release that feel-good hormone called dopamine. And that's a chemical that makes us feel more confident, more in control, and even better, it boots those adrenaline and cortisol stress hormones to the curb. So we put our focus on how we can help people, and we can actively reduce our physiological symptoms of stress and anxiety just by thinking, how can I help people? Pretty cool, right? So this is how to combat the fear of the audience. Now, while I listed out these other 6 fears as separate fears, many of them are intertwined. And I personally have found that I've had all of these different fears in some form or another at different times when I've been speaking on stage and online for the last 15 years. So the thing is, there's a great expression I learnt recently which says, consuming information without taking action is procrastination. So don't just absorb this information and write it down. put it into practice. I encourage you to think about the next talk that you're going to deliver, whether it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-100 or 1-to-1,000, whatever number of people they are. When you're in that situation and you start to feel anxious and stressed, ask yourself, how can I help this person? Or how can I help these people? And see what a difference it makes in terms of your anxiety and your ability to communicate more powerfully. If you're in the community, you can direct message me with straight through the chat with any questions that you have, and I would be delighted to help you out. Here's the QR code again to help you get access to the program for free for 7 days. So that is how to handle audience fear. My next session is going to be on anticipated fear. Now, this is the one where you worry about everything that could possibly go wrong before and during your presentation. And it's another one that pops up for me quite a lot as well. Look forward to sharing with you the solutions on how to manage that. My name is Danielle Drew.